With the focus on impacts DLT tech might have on the environment, the announcement of the Hedera Ecosystem Sustainability Fund was timed perfectly. To tell us more about the new fund, we have Rob and Wes from the HBAR Foundation, Dan from Tymlez, and Katrina from Civic Ledger. Thanks for making the time today, everyone.
Thank you, Brandon. We're happy to be here.
Thanks for being here.
So I'm going to be directing these questions to individuals, but after that person answers, if anybody else wants to kick in and add some more color, please feel free. So we'll start with Wes. To kick it off, can you just tell us about what the Sustainability Fund is and why it was formed?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the Sustainable Impact Fund is really focused on creating transparency across environmental, nature-based, and just the broader UN Sustainable Development Goal focused markets. A lot of times, to many folks, that means environmental markets, things like carbon offsets or carbon removals, or even measuring carbon emissions, which we can think of the supply and demand side respectively. But oftentimes these markets are very opaque. Most of the times the processes are hard to follow. They encompass many roles of participants in the carbon or environmental economy that we're focused on. And those roles are sometimes not as clear to the average person. And oftentimes we don't know the actors. Sometimes we know maybe a registry that an asset comes from. Sometimes we know the project, where it exists in a location, but we don't have a full picture. And so we're taking these very opaque processes, these very opaque markets, which oftentimes have prices that are not necessarily reflective of the work done, or sometimes the fees don't get paid to the individuals creating the change. And we're making it transparent both on a project perspective as well as the payment and financial perspective. And we're looking at ways to improve the markets across the board where we can measure things back to the individual unit of value, whether it's a metric ton of carbon captured or emitted, a megaliter of water sold or consumed. Those are all different things that we're looking at and trying to improve, not just from a DLT perspective or from a liquidity perspective, but trying to make sure it has an actual change in the real world. And so from a Sustainable Impact Fund, we're not just focused on the crypto economy, but we're focused on the greater global economy and how we can create change in the world that we believe in.
All right, good stuff. So Katrina, we'll move on to you. Can you tell us about what Civic Ledger is building with support from the HBAR Foundation?
Yes, thanks, Brandon. So Civic Ledger has been in the business of blockchain for the last 6 years, and one of the products that we came out early with in a couple of years ago was we wanted to study the idea of using this technology to build next generation water markets. Now, for those who don't know what a water market is, it's kind of like a carbon market, but this time you actually have water rights. And water rights are very prescriptive to a person, to a location, to a place, and they're highly regulated. But we need water markets so we can ensure water is allocated to its highest value use and we're able to account for it. But there's a lot of problems that come with those markets, similar to what Wes was saying. They're opaque. We don't know who the actors are. The registries are closed. There's proprietary databases. And one of the most important pieces of information that's quite absent from the market is price. So we have been building with the technology another layer for a few years. But one of the questions that our stakeholders keep on asking us is around the consensus, around the energy consumption. So because we are building environmental markets, it makes sense for us to rethink about, well, what is the impact we're making on our planet at the time when we're trying to save it? And this has led to conversations with Rob Allen, and Rob and I have known each other for a number of years because Rob and I were early to the industry in Australia. We both served as directors on the old Australian Digital Commerce Association, which is now Blockchain Australia. And we just watched each other what we were doing. And then when I noticed he got involved with Hedera, we started having some conversations and introduced me to Wes. And it just seemed to be a good fit. We are the first company that's come into the Sustainability Impact Fund that is looking at water. So we're quite unique and we will be breaking new ground. And we want to do that with Hedera. We think their network and their enterprise connections will be beneficial for how we build our technology and how we interoperate with those other systems.
Sure. So Dan, same question. What do you guys got cooking at Tymlez?
All right, so Tymlez was established in 2016. We've been building blockchain solutions since day one. Our current focus really is around the ESG space. So we're currently building an end-to-end secured ESG solution. And we're focused on bringing like pretty much the highest quality data from industrial IoT and IoT devices into the platform. One of the things we saw pretty early on is it doesn't matter how good the blockchain is, it doesn't matter how good the blockchain solution is. If the data's not there and the data isn't good, it's garbage in, garbage out. So sure. We're really looking at using things like the Hedera Guardian, for example, along with policies that are very specific to our customer requirements to kind of tokenize the carbon and the emissions. And just this will allow us to create like several different outcomes. Primarily, this is about allowing our customers to understand their carbon footprint. As a function of this, what this allows us to do is produce things like audit quality reports, but also allow them to use those reports to understand exactly what their emissions are and offset those emissions. If they have additional requirements other than just reporting on their ESG. For us, really, the end goal of this is to allow our customers to align their reporting and offsets with any scheme that suits them. Within Australia, we've got things like RECs and ACCUs as some of the kind of more official ones. But we're also really heavily looking at things like the voluntary markets. We can accomplish the voluntary markets by participating within the Hedera ecosystem, by helping design an interoperable ecosystem whereby all participants in the Hedera ecosystem can automatically interact with each other. And the way we do this is by creating a standardized token. And this standardized token will allow, both ourselves and, Civic Ledger as well, and a lot of the other participants within the market to kind of automatically trade it. It's like we recognize what this token represents. So therefore we can trade it automatically. It all of a sudden becomes a fungible asset. The important parts for this though is, we're looking ahead to the future as well. And while most of our customers will probably want to go down the RECs and the ACCUs, but, there's talk within the system of, automated trading things. So, I probably rightly or wrongly call it like a Uniswap for carbon or something like that, where basically you can allow people to go in and literally trade it on the spot. But again, this only works if every single participant can understand the token structure. And that's one of the things that we're really focused on building.
Yeah, and those markets are going to be enormous going into the future. Rob, $100 million is a lot of money, even for the HBAR Foundation. Is this fund solely funded through the foundation, or are there other partners involved as well?
It sounds like a lot of money, but remember the foundation has been gifted a significant war chest to distribute with fiduciary care over a number of years. So as you and the listeners probably know now, we've got 4 main funds, sustainability being one of them, crypto economy, metaverse, and payments and fintech being the other 3. So the foundation's been set up to distribute these tokens, distribute the HBAR into the ecosystem. This isn't about dumping HBARs onto projects and losing control. All of our projects are incentivized. They're incentivized to grow. They're rewards based. So as the network grows, as the businesses that we support are successful, they get rewarded more and more out of that pot. So there's a very specific structure, especially in the Sustainable Impact Fund, to track that. We'll be tracking it on Hedera. So the projects that are receiving these grants are delivering according to the agreements, but also incentivized and rewarded for doing so. And that's the right thing to do. We mustn't forget that it doesn't benefit the Hedera network for all the HBARs to be held in treasury. A proof of stake network is underpinned, and the security of that network is underpinned by the distribution of those tokens over time in a controlled way. So that's what the foundation has been set up to do. And we're playing our part. It's just as Wes said, we're doing it in a way that supports value-aligned sustainable development projects that are contributing to the health of the planet.
Well, I'm certainly impressed. You guys have hit the ground running, and I'm impressed with the projects that you guys are already starting with. Wes, the HBAR Foundation is open sourcing Hedera-based infrastructure called the Guardian, and I think we've already heard it in the interview so far. Dovu's brought this up several times as well. Can you explain what it is?
Yeah, so the Guardian's an open source piece of software. You can think of it as a layer above the Hedera network. We actually have it in the Hedera GitHub today. And effectively, it allows you to take a process, so say a methodology of how you measure the emission of carbon or the capture of some carbon emissions. And each one of those processes is often today done by a standards body. So in the emission side, it could be the greenhouse gas protocol as an example. And they define how you're supposed to measure quantitatively your emissions. There's different scopes in greenhouse gas emissions. And so for each scope, there's a specific process and there's a way that you should define roles and actors. So you may have someone who's doing a baseline measurement. You may have someone who's an auditor. And then there's a quantitative outcome based on those measurements that they have up front. And then they're constantly checking that over periods of time, whether it's monthly, quarterly, or yearly, where they have to keep that up to date. Now, the Guardian allows you to map that process and then define who the actors are. And you can actually bring in things like decentralized identifiers to represent those actors. And so in a way where you're not actually compromising the privacy of the individual who's contributing to that measurement or necessarily the organization, you're allowed to have full auditability of every single process with the known role. And the cool thing about the Guardian is it actually is allowing you to connect verifiable credentials of the folks who set the rules of the process to those individual roles and actors. And so when you produce data, that data is verified and trusted from the output source, whether it's an individual doing a manual check or an audit, or it's a sensor saying I'm producing X amount of emissions because every single quantitative event produces this amount of emissions. Say it's one metric ton based on 1 day's worth of emissions. That would be quite a lot. Or in the case of, say, a megawatt hour, if you're measuring energy consumption, you can convert that to an emissions equivalent. And so that's kind of how the Guardian works, is you map the process, the roles, the actors involved in those roles, and the quantitative output. And ultimately, that forms in a token on the Hedera token service. So we take a lot of different HCS events following the Hedera DID method, and the outcome is a tokenized asset that can measure the carbon emissions or measure carbon offsets in the case of the environmental use case. But that goes beyond that. In water, it's in megaliters of water based on data coming from things like flow meters or other types of measurement. And of course, you could look at this even outside the sustainability context. We saw a project called NFT Grade doing it for artists process last week, just announcing that they've selected the Guardian for that. Okay. But ultimately, the Guardian gives you a few things. It gives you auditability of that data. It gives you discoverability of the token and the relation to that audit trail, which isn't really done today in carbon markets in a way that's easily transparent. And because we follow the standards, we can now, and Dan alluded to this, get to liquidity of those assets because we know the taxonomy of all those roles and standards. And we're building on things like the W3C identity standards. And we're building on the token taxonomy framework coming out of the IWA and now the GBBC, which acquired the IWA last year. So
fascinating stuff. So Rob, there's been some very credible academic studies on the green credentials of Hedera. Can you tell us about these?
Well, yes. I mean, the most obvious one was the one that UCL did last September with researchers from the University College London and a number of other universities. It's all in the public domain, so it can the viewers can go and take a look. But the summary is that they reviewed 6 proof-of-stake networks to determine, with scientific method, which one was the most green. They proved proved scientifically or empirically that what we all know, proof of work, is magnitudes, many magnitudes greater in terms of energy consumption. Even when sourced from green energy sources, that's taking green energy from something else that it could be directed towards, of course. And those 6 networks, the proof of stake networks that were looked at, and I won't name them, but they're the obvious ones. The next best network was 250 times more inefficient than Hedera. And for example, ETH2 is many magnitudes. So even the incredible reductions in energy consumption on Ethereum 2 come nowhere close to what Hedera already has. And
if they're successful, right? If they're successful in implementing it, right?
Jury's out, right? Jury's out. But And you've got a consensus chain and an execution chain, and one's being measured and one's not. So, you've got to compare like with like here. And Hedera is very transparently, openly efficient, to the point that actually we've offset all of the carbon as well. So we're actually carbon negative. And what we believe is, and in discussion with projects that want to build on Guardian, and we've got a very long pipeline of projects coming down the track, both ecosystem players, suppliers of these new types of digital assets, and consumers, buyers of these assets. They all recognize that building sustainability into their operations requires a network on which the base layer isn't actually giving them carbon debt before they even start, right? So that's a really important aspect for them.
Sure.
And that's what Hedera brings. So the UCL study went so successfully, UCL decided to join the governing council, and that was the trigger for them joining. They were so impressed by the technology.
Oh, I didn't know that.
They joined. Yeah, that was their onboarding moment, and have continued to contribute through the governing council to the thought leadership that the tech committee and the governing council itself provides in this space.
Good stuff. Okay, so we're going to change gears, get into some regulatory stuff here. Wes, the recent executive order on digital assets was very focused on ways DLT impacts the environment and also ways it can help. This seems like a real shot in the arm for the L1 that's been deemed the most efficient and environmentally friendly, as well as the environmentally focused use cases building on top of it. What are your thoughts on the executive order in relation to the Hedera ecosystem?
So we really welcome the executive order and the action that's going to come from that. We always appreciate, when folks take the time to look at consensus algorithms, and the executive order has some call outs there. Beyond that, really understanding the opportunities for both emissions measurement and trading, and tied to things like offsets, tied to things like carbon removals, I think is really important. And I'm glad that came out of the White House, taking that as one of the key actions. I think it marries really well with the values we have from an HBAR Foundation perspective and a Hedera network perspective, making sustainability one of the four key pillars that we have for the foundation. And so I'm really encouraged, and in some ways it feels very validating that we have leaders in both the U.S. government perspective, but on a global perspective, valuing sustainability and seeing the use case for distributed ledgers as really a good way to solve for that. And beyond that, there's other use cases that they talked about, whether it's in energy trading, and I know there's a big focus too on CBDCs and how those two areas can interact with these types of markets. I think is a really important area of focus. And we don't just look at it from a U.S. perspective, but a global perspective. Seeing governments take action in this area is a really encouraging opportunity for us. And it's not just the U.S. government taking action, but we do applaud them for doing so.
Yeah. So, while we have our guests from down under, what's the regulatory environment look like down there for DLT and ways it might impact the environment?
Our Australian government has been sort of arriving slowly to the conversation. What we're really dealing with here in Australia at the moment is obviously, like the rest of the world, central bank digital currencies, but also how the treatment of digital assets are to be considered in legislation, how DAOs look. We do have a select committee report that was produced last year with the efforts of the industry working with the government, but that's all just basis of recommendations. What we're really looking for is the implementation of those recommendations. But what we also see is the industry already leading. They already understand the value proposition of the DLT. They're getting on with it, but they are still looking for that regulatory safe haven. So Dan might be able to make some comments, because I could go down the waterhole, but I don't think I want to on this call. But Dan's probably got some, because there's been a lot of controversy in Australia around the ACCUs and the government doing interference with the ACCUs. Now the price has dropped, and the community are coming out quite. So the price of carbon's just dropped in this country because government have stepped in and muddled with the market. So Dan's probably got a point of view on that one.
My point of view is the same as it's always been, is that Australia's renewable energy certificates, whatever they are, whether ACCs or RSEs, are just archaic.
Paper?
Like you have to fill out a paper form, and the SLA is 90 days to get it back to us. I mean, you can't work with that in the kind of economy that the future needs, right? You need to be having this instant tradability of carbon, not, oh, okay, fill out a form and we'll speak to you in 3 months. That's just ridiculous. So, the ACCUs were slightly more modernized, but it's still a 90-day SLA to do it. It's like, I just don't understand how a market can work in that way, because, anyway, look, again, like Katrina, you can go down a massive rabbit hole on this, but I just think that the voluntary markets are where this is going to be. And the only way that the voluntary markets can succeed is if some of this opaqueness is removed and the trust can be added there. And by adding these kind of, this token taxonomy that we're talking about building, and having all of the carbon information encoded directly in the token. So the token itself tells you that this 1 ton of carbon is made up exactly like this. That's how you do that. You can claim carbon offsets at the moment for some guy in Ethiopia planting a tree, and it's a ridiculous amount of carbon for it. And while I'm sure that probably has value, there are big companies who, again, I won't name, who are buying these, let's call them D+ tokens at best, and using them to offset their carbon because they're cheap. Like, that kind of carbon token might be $1, and then you can use it to offset a ton of carbon, for example. Now, does it actually offset a ton of carbon? Is it actually legitimate? Then, at the moment, there's no right or wrong way of saying it other than they're not the official Australian government ones, which nobody wants because they're archaic. So it's this chicken and egg thing. Like, we want to do better, but in order to do better, we've got to apply some trust to the processes that already exist. And in order to do that, we've got to build this ridiculous, huge ecosystem that's going to be in order to do that. So I think we're on the right side of things right now. And I think everything that Hedera and all of the participants within this ecosystem are doing, to fulfill our needs for our own customers, first of all, but also to make it better for, especially for Australia on our side of it, to make it better for Australia to be able to participate in international markets, which isn't feasible at the moment. I think that's the way that we need to go.
And I think was just going to say, I mean, what we actually build on, because obviously Dan and I are in very similar situations. We have in the past worked with government and talked about water markets and how they need to look in the future to sustain water from a water scarcity perspective. But there's different layers here. We're talking about institutional layers, regulatory layers, but what we look at is governance. So we design markets from the bottom up, and we instill the governance that's at place to understand, well, water is very, very local. It has a lot of attributes. We can go down the line and say, well, could you tell me whether it's fungible or non-fungible because you're tokenizing? But what is it just a little bit more complex than that? So using this technology, DLT, Hedera, is that we're able to build the governance into the market so everyone can agree the state of the market, but also who can be in there and who can't be and how water is to be traded, and gives us provenance, it gives us history, and those contracts cannot be broken. And therefore you bring, as Dan said, we work on the perspective of trustlessness, whereby every bit of information that's required in the market for it to be rational cannot be possibly omitted. And that's when if you're able to do that through technology, the way we use it, then the actors in that market are not paying a price to bring trust into the market, because that's what happens right now. You've got to pay all this money to try and get some sense of what is that market doing? How much should I be buying my water for? Am I selling it to the right person? Am I going to be compliant in this trade?
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
I mean, sorry, just something about all that extra money that comes through on that takes off the price of what should be, carbon credits, right? So let's say if we talk about carbon credits, if you're having to pay a bunch for audits and you're having to pay a bunch for elsewhere, then the price of it, the profits from it, let's say from these carbon credits drops because you're having to take that out of the bottom line.
Yeah, makes sense. Rob, did you have something you want to add?
If I can just add, talking to these guys, it's very hard to get a word in edgeways, but that's fine. I love them.
They're passionate.
We're all passionate. It's worth saying that only Hedera can do this, right? This has to be done at scale. If you want fine-grained, high-fidelity data that goes down to the device level, and you want trust, you want transparency, you want the throughput, you want fairly ordered markets, then Hedera is the only network that will do that. And that's not because I'm a fanboy, it's because it's true. And this is why we've got this long pipeline of projects kind of beating a path to the door. Now the Guardian has been open sourced. Now the full Hedera technology stack has been open sourced, and the other parts of the ecosystem are forming as well. It doesn't sit on its own. Just having a token doesn't complete the picture. You need financial markets infrastructure. You need visualization tools. You need wallets. And all of that is coming as well. You saw the Miko announcement last week as well. This stream of wonderful announcements that came out of Australia Blockchain Week last week gave a pretty good picture of really where we are and where these ecosystem players are forming, whether it's providers of these sustainable digital assets, whether it's the infrastructure players, or whether it's the demand side. And remember, we've got up to 39 corporates, all of which have ESG policies. They all need to be compliant with the obligation of accounting for their non-financial risk, which is what ESG is. And so we've got demand sorted as well, in addition to the rest of the planet, right? So and we can scale to that. And onboarding the supply side is our priority now. And going back to this $100 million fund, that's where we're really pushing, because we want the world of sustainable development projects to recognize that this is actually the accelerator that they need to bring those assets with a true and fair value to open and transparent marketplaces.
Well, it sounds like you guys are well on your way to finding a private solution. I think that's where most of the solutions actually come from. So I applaud you for that. Rob kind of already led into some of this, but Dan, I'd like to know why you decided to build Tymlez on Hedera.
So Tymlez had a blockchain platform. We have a blockchain platform, and it was built on kind of Ethermint with Tendermint consensus, with the idea that everybody was building Solidity. And back in sort of 2016 when we were founded, there weren't many blockchains around that made it easy for developers to interact with it. You either had to know Solidity or some of the I don't remember back then, but everything was either a Solidity offshoot or some other horrible way of dealing with things. So I'm a developer myself, so I would much rather be interacting with APIs. I would much rather have most of the stuff that I don't need to worry about as a developer abstracted away from me. Like, am I going to mess up this token function call? Like, I don't want me or any of my developers to have to deal with that. So Hedera was instantly attractive to me for that reason. Like, APIs, not esoteric smart contract languages. So that was the first reason. But as we were going through and trying to work out things like volumetrics for our solution, pricing models for things like blockchain fees, the biggest thing that became attractive to us with Hedera was, the transactions are fixed fee. They're denominated in US dollars, which I don't think any other blockchain is doing at the moment. So having the ability to be able to say, okay, so we've got a solution for client A. We know that it's going to put through this many transactions for consensus, this many transactions for tokens, this many transactions for X. So therefore, based on the current site thing, it's going to cost X number of dollars per month. That as a business really allows you to plan ahead. Like, I'm not worried that if the network suddenly gets busier, then this is going to blow out and eat away all of our profits. Because, in the carbon markets, the profits they're not very big, right? So what we have to do is make sure that the profit for the carbon tokenization, for example, is not going to be eaten away at by having huge amounts of blockchain fees. And look, businesses want a price per year contract, for example, or a price per site or a price per whatever. They like simplified pricing rather than, if it's a Tuesday and I'm wearing green pants, then it's going to cost this much kind of thing. They just can't work with that. So I think that those two main things is the abstraction away of a lot of the the underlying fundamentals of how consensus is done, how tokens are transferred. That was a huge one for us. The fixed price transactions were probably the next biggest one. But obviously, as an ESG company as well, we can't overlook the fact that the ESG credentials of the Hedera system itself, the Hedera ledger itself, being by far the lowest that's out there. I mean, we can't be a green company providing green solutions if we're not aligned with a green ledger. So, the biggest thing that I think a lot of these companies are maybe not aware of is, if you're going to do this properly in terms of audits, then you're going to have to factor your blockchain transactions into your calculations. Now, how transparent are most of these blockchains about exactly how much carbon they're producing overall? I mean, it's really difficult to do. Like, if you think of Bitcoin as a distributed ledger, different grids around the world, different, obviously it's more efficient to have a Bitcoin miner, for example, on green energy because it's the cheapest. However, if you think about those ones that aren't on there, there's no real way to tell exactly what the carbon output of the Bitcoin network is, because every grid has a different makeup at any one point. Like for us with the Hedera side of things, the amount is negligible. So the times that we will have to count it should be relatively easy to work out exactly what it is.
Yeah, and I mean, you brought up the fees that are associated, priced in dollars, and that's not something that other blockchains can't do. Rob mentioned that there's all kinds of things that are very unique to Hedera that only Hedera can do. But that's just a good business decision to do something like that. Katrina, why do you think that businesses and enterprises like yours are drawn to the Hedera network?
I think it's because it's about our customers. We like Dan and ourselves, we have a business that has customers, and we need to ensure that whatever we deliver to them has to be cost effective. You can't build something that is going to solve certain problems, and all of a sudden we say, well, for us to stand up a market, we have to execute 4 smart contracts. Those contracts for us to execute on Ethereum is going to cost us $2,500 per contract. So for us to stand up a market, it's going to be at least $10,000. Then when we do your transactions on that, we don't know how much it's going to cost. And Dan and I know, if you're sitting in front of a customer and they go, how much is this going to cost? You kind of go, don't know. You lose credibility. So you have to be, this is the world, when you're working in with emerging technology, you're still solving real world problems, and people want to work in commercial terms. So you have to speak a language that they understand. So we spent a lot of time, we didn't take this decision lightly. As a company, we did a lot of deep diving. We did a lot of analysis. We did a lot of comparisons. We looked at the pros and the cons, and we had to come back to the position of our customers. And, you could go and find a layer 2 solution but that's not going to solve the problem of the gas fees going up and down. And you just can't say, I'm sorry, but if you're going to sell water, but mind you, here's another transaction that we didn't actually tell you about. Customers are going to walk away from that. So you have to, as Dan said, you need to abstract that from the conversation, because what you want to do is solve a problem. You want to be the company that's going to make it better, but you need to be clear in the commercial reality of what this actually is going to cost. And as Dan said, then you as a company can actually then forward plan exactly what your margins are going to be and what your profitability is going to be. And it's very, very difficult to do that when it's going up and down. Yes, it was easy in 2016 because there was no one here. And we were using colored coin on Bitcoin way in 2016 while we were waiting for the Ethereum to come together. And it was easy, but now it's too hard. And we have been waiting since 2017 for Ethereum 2.0 to come out. And then obviously once we looked at the business side of things, then you go to your values. So you got to look at your customers, you got to look at the commercial reality, then you got to look at values. And if you actually, claim yourself to be doing A, B, C, and D, yet you're not actually doing it in your business, you can't hold your head up high. You need to be able to walk the talk and actually show your customers as well that you're actually taking reasonable care of whatever you build is not going to bring more harm. Because our mantra is do not do harm. Don't do harm to the tech, don't do harm to your customers. So that was the whole sort of thing that came together. It was, again, timing. Wes and Rob and I having those conversations. It's always timing. Things were right. We made the decision, and here we are.
Well said. Well said. So one thing before we go on to closing, there will be a Sustainability Fund AMA Twitter Spaces held by Hello Future Buzz on Thursday, March 31st at 5 p.m. Eastern. It'll be a perfect opportunity for anybody who has any additional questions. And I think Rob and Wes, and I think Katrina as well, are you guys all going to be on that?
We are indeed.
Okay.
Yes, we are.
Exciting.
Yep, we are.
I'm going to do a final roundtable here for final thoughts. If you guys have anything you'd like to add in, Wes, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so Brandon, thanks again for having us. I think just the final thoughts is we're really excited about the opportunity we have to drive change. We're excited about our great partners, whether it's Tymlez, Civic Ledger, Miko, or anyone else in the sustainability ecosystem. And for folks who are interested in learning more or making a difference, we do encourage you, if you have a project, to go apply on hbarfoundation.org for a grant. Reach out to us. We're out there on LinkedIn or Twitter. Learn more about the community, whether it's through Twitter Spaces or just talking to some of the different projects. We think there's an opportunity for everyone to get involved, both in a commercial perspective, if you're interested in building a solution, buying offsets or measuring your own personal emissions. Dovu even has tools specifically if you just want to measure your wallets on other networks or even buy offsets individually. There's roles for everyone in our ecosystem to build and participate from a sustainability community perspective. And so we just encourage that and really excited for the opportunity to be here.
All right, good stuff. Dan, final thoughts.
Nothing huge from me. I think we've covered off everything within, at least within the Hedera side of things for ESG, within the context of these calls. But I mean, just personally, I'm excited to get involved in this because I feel like we can add real value to our customers. Like, I don't want to say that I'm a blockchain skeptic, but I'm kind of a blockchain skeptic. I'm one of those people where people say, okay, yeah, we can do that on the blockchain. I know this came up a lot at Australian Blockchain Week. People say, oh, yeah, you can put peas on a blockchain. You're like, but why? And like, there's very, very few solutions that I feel. It has to make sense. It has to make sense, right? And this really does make sense to me. And, when I first started with Tymlez, people coming up to you, they always come up to you with all these great ideas. Hey, we should do this on the blockchain. And you're like, why? So tell me how blockchain makes this any better. But I think, this interoperable ecosystem really allows us to deliver, amazing value for our customers. It allows us to do things that I don't think have been possible in the past, at least not in anything other than some tiny walled garden. This really opens it up to absolutely everybody. And look, ESG, as we get closer to 2030 or 2035, I don't know, I always forget which one, they keep moving the dates. Like, these carbon offsets are going to become huge. Like, there's going to be this massive liquidity crunch in them, I think, because unfortunately, there's just not enough people generating them. And those that are generating them are using it to offset their own usage. So I feel like we're going to get into this point in a market where people are like, there's going to be a lot of money that we can be made here by building solar farms and creating these carbon offset tokens and, then selling them out to the market as a thing. So I think we're in the right place, the right time, and with the right technology.
Couldn't agree more. Katrina.
I think it is. I mean, Rob, Wes, and Dan and I were in Blockchain Week in Australia. So in Australia last week, for your listeners, we had 5 days across 5 cities, 250 speakers, talking about all different things in blockchain, crypto, NFTs. So when we first started in this industry, there was either Bitcoin or blockchain, or Bitcoin or Ethereum, and just crypto. And we were talking to ourselves because nobody wanted to come to our conferences. We're always there by ourselves talking about waiting for the world to arrive. And last week we saw it, like Rob was interviewing. He had a great panel on Monday in Sydney where he actually spoke to Nigel Dodson from ANZ, and now ANZ are going to be releasing a stable coin on Hedera network. Now that's great news for us because we need to have a financial facility to interoperate with our water ledger platform to actually do a clearance, settle the actual funds itself. So if we can introduce a stable coin into our market, it's going to make it a lot more better for our customers because they can see that there's a financial institution there that they trust.
Sure.
Trust, I use that word interestingly enough, but I'm seeing massive change. We're no longer do we go into rooms and people turn around and turn their backs on us and roll their eyes. So we're at this really great place right now. Mainstream, are we? Yes, I think we could be. It's about now what we do next. The world is watching. Now we have to step up, deliver these projects, deliver on what we actually always had that vision to do. And I think going forward with partnership with Hedera is going to allow us to actually do that. So I'm excited because I think the time is now.
Well, I'm excited as well. Rob, we'll round it out with you.
We're just getting started, right? But the ecosystem is forming around the sustainable economy, and we're right at the heart of it. So over the course of the next year, I think we're going to see exponential acceleration as we bring more supply and demand into this ecosystem using the infrastructure that we're building and open sourcing and the partners we're bringing in. That won't exist on its own. And as Katrina said, I think stablecoins, financial markets infrastructure, the crypto economy fund that's just been announced today from the foundation, these are all kind of contributory. But our focus and our mission focus really is to kind of really get the sustainable economy built on HBAR and show the world what it can do, because there are real world problems that need to be solved, and we've got a long list of partners that want to solve it with us. So I'm looking forward to coming back, Brandon, with the team and talking again in a few months, and you can ask us how great that ecosystem is forming.
Yeah, I would love to have you guys back. This was a lot of fun. It took us a little bit to put it together, but I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.